My name is Cepeda, but everyone calls me Mick. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, which is where my story starts, and I reside in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a member of Greater Boston Legal Services. I used to work for the federal government, and I had a heart attack because of stress and because I had a malformation in my heart that I wasn't aware of until all the stress of my job. As a consequence of my heart attack when I was 35 years old, I had to leave my job, and I returned to the States because I was stationed in Puerto Rico. When I came back to the States, I was still sick. They requested me to go back after 6 months, and I had a relapse. Because of the relapse, I could not return to work until further notice, which the federal government then said, well, we need someone. And so I had a choice. I had a choice of stay job attached with no income, 3 children, single parent, or resign my job and go on public assistance. After a lot of struggle and about 4 more months, running out of resources and everything else that I had accumulated, I decided that I had to resign my job. I resigned my job with the federal government, and I went on public assistance. $363 a month for 4 people. And I became increasingly angrier of when I kept looking at the situations, and every time I turned, I kept saying, I need to get back on my feet. If you only help me to pay my rent. Just give me additional resources so I could pay my rent so that I can get back to a job, so I can get back to work. It was always denials. Well, we don't have the resources, we don't have the services, you don't qualify, you're overeducated, you're overqualified for this job or that job or whatever. And so I made a conscious decision that if they weren't going to help me, I was going to stay where I was. And I was going to let the government raise my children. It didn't last long because I'm not that kind of person. I went back to school. In school, I went back to college. I got another degree. And I continued, and that's where I met my teachers, because I decided that I was going to learn the law since everybody kept telling me no. And one of my teachers asked me if I had ever heard of Legal Services, Greater Boston Legal Services, that they were looking for client board members. And I said, I don't want to know about them. I've already been there, been denied of services 3 times. No, I'm not going to do it. But after thinking about it and having 3, 4, 5 people tell me, you should go down to Greater Boston Legal Services and get some assistance and do this and do that, I finally decided, I said, you know what, this is broken, it needs to be fixed. And I went, and I, like a lot of people, decided I was going to fix the system. And so I said, okay, I'm going to join Greater Boston Legal Services, and I'm going to straighten them out, because they practically refused me 3, 4 times assistance. There's got to be something wrong. And so that's how I got to Greater Boston Legal Services. So in 1999, 2000, I got elected on the board, and I found out that I had 28 people recommend me to the board. And like I said, I don't think I know 28 people associated with Greater Boston Legal Services, but apparently I did, because when I went to the board and we went to the first annual meeting, I saw all these people and said, oh, I didn't know you belonged there, you know. So I had 28 people nominate me to the board. And the rest is history. When I got there, I was determined. Like I said, I was angry, really angry. I was determined to change the system. I was determined to change my life and everybody else's life, but especially my children. I wanted a different future for my children, but I was still determined not to go back to a job. And I still felt that, well, I had a good job. You all made me lose my job, so now you're going to support me until I decide. And that was the conscious decision. While I was in Greater Boston Legal Services, I became an advocate. I would go visit the courts, and I would see a lot of injustice. I would see a lot of non-representation, a lot of misrepresentation, a lot of plea bargaining, and I just didn't feel that was right. I mean, if you're, and I always said, well, if you're not guilty, if you didn't do it, why would you plea bargain? And it was the scariest part of a child's, especially when I went to juvenile courts, was the scariest part. To see it, a 15, 16-year-old saying, I did, yes, I'm guilty. But no, I didn't do it, but I don't want to go to jail 10 years. Or I didn't do it, but I don't want to be 5 years. But then exactly that's what they were doing, because they were plea bargaining that for something that would change their whole life. And so I started advocating at youth courts. From youth, I had a problem with my rent. Not with my rent, but with my landlord. And so I said, well, I need to go to court. And I had been to court previously because I couldn't find an apartment and I went homeless. And when I did that, it was like the landlord's lawyer was so abusive that I said, you know what? I really, really need a lawyer. People need lawyers to come and at least just the one day represent them. At least have somebody there to say, I'm here, I'm listening, let's get the job done. Because I had a landlord who continually sent me court notices. If I was missing $5 on my rent, if I was late 3 days, there would be a 30-day notice. And I got tired. And I said, you know what, this is going to end. And in the meantime, every time I went to court, I kept seeing the abuse. Housing, youth, quarries. Disabled. It was like a gamut of things. And I'm saying, I'm a social worker. Why was I not aware of this stuff? And then there came a trademark. Then there was like, it became, famous, I guess, or the in thing to say domestic violence. And then that was the in word, domestic violence. And then I saw the abuse there on both sides. The person who would go and claim domestic violence just because they wanted to get rid of them or because they were tired or they wanted to leave or something. And the person who actually had the violence. And I said, this isn't right. There's got to be some kind of way that you can, that the courts can deal with this. And the courts don't want to take the risk of having a woman as particular say, I have domestic violence, and then have that woman get killed. So everybody was dealt with the same stick, whether it was true or not. And I saw so many things going on in those courts. The same thing with GCF, Department of Children and Families, or the Department of Children's Services. The same thing, the abuses that were going on. And I just, it kept breaking my heart, and I didn't know what to do. And all the time I kept asking myself, as a social worker for so many years, why didn't I see this before? But now I had the time. And I had the time then to actually sit, because every other time I had gone to court, every other time I was doing a job. I was busy. I was focused on the case in hand. I wasn't focused. I wasn't looking at what was around my surroundings. And that was the issue. And so I decided that I was going to advocate for all those people who didn't have a voice, that I was going to talk for all those people who couldn't talk. Immigration. And I decided that I was going to do my own business, my own advocacy business. And that's what I did. I didn't charge. Said I did translations. I did advocacy. If you needed, someone to hold your hand, while you were there. I'd go with them. I'd go to court. Someone to, say something when you weren't able to express yourself. I was there. Someone who needed a paper translated. I was there.
How did you connect with people who needed that kind of help? Did you just see them, or did you get referrals?
I was a social worker, and before I had been transferred to Puerto Rico, I had worked at the Colonel Cushing Spanish Center, and so they had units. They had employment unit, employment and training sessions. It had housing, and so even though I was in the employment section and the social work section, I saw people in and out looking for services for everything else, because the Colonel Cushing Center was for anyone who needed any type of assistance. Whether it was job training, whether it was looking for a job, whether it was healthcare services, whether it was interpreting services, whatever. It was a center by the Catholic Church. And so that's where I worked. And so that's where I got most of my clients from. And then I got...
But you weren't being employed by them?
No.
You just went there?
I was there, and people, at the beginning I was employed by them. I had been employed by them when I first graduated high school. I had been employed by them. So I knew a lot of the people that worked there. And so when I went in, I said, you know what, I'm going to do this. And I worked for them for 2 years, and then I left. And when I left to go to my federal job, and I came back, people knew me.
Nice.
And so I got referrals. Like, they'd go, oh, here's her name. Her name is Mick. Here's her phone number. Call her. I think I made the greatest difference in my own family, my own children. But if I were to choose a teaching experience where I made the most difference, I think it would be the client board member who came and literally said, I can't talk. I can't express myself like you can. I don't know what to say. And within 2 months, she was the greatest advocate ever. Because all she needed was confidence. All she needed was someone to tell her, to show her, and to tell her that she counted, and that she was a human being, and that she had rights, and explain what rights she had. And built the ego. Because sometimes when you're abused and misused, you lose your ego, you lose yourself as a person, and you become a doormat for somebody else. And when you realize that you do have value, that you do have something to say, then you become the greatest advocate for yourself as well as for anybody else. And that was my greatest story. I also had a client who came into me, and when I was working also for advising for employment, and this person said to me, I've never worked, I've always been a homemaker. And I said, oh, you never worked? He said, no, I never worked. And I said, okay, so what did you do? Well, I had 9 kids, took care of my kids. I said, well, what did you do? Well, let's see. I cooked for 12 of us, because it was me, my husband, and 9 kids. I did the laundry, I did the shopping, I cleaned my house. And I said, oh, and you never worked? I says, well, how much, when you go shopping, what do you do? Do you take a list, or what do you do? Well, sometimes I take a list, but most of the time I got it in my head, because I do the shopping. So how do you cook? Oh, do you measure? Sometimes. But most of the time I just look and I know exactly how much I'm going to put in. So I said, okay. So why are you looking for a job now? Well, because my husband died, and I still have 6 kids, at home, and they're going to school, and I need some way to support. And I said, okay. And I had just gotten a referral from someone who had asked me if I knew anybody who could do large volume cooking for a private men's club on Commonwealth Avenue. And I said, oh my goodness, I just have the person for you. And I said, this person has cooked, like she's got 30 years experience in volume cooking. She can do shopping, she can do this. And I sent her to the job. And she's been there 25 years. And the last time I saw her, it was about 3 years ago. And she, like, I didn't even recognize her. And she came to me and she said, "You don't recognize me," and put her arms around me and hugged me. And she said, "I'm still at the club." She said, "And my kids have gone to college and I've graduated and I've gone so far." And I said, "Thank you." And she said, "You know what? If you hadn't encouraged me, I never knew I could do anything." And I said, "No, you're a homemaker. That's a title. You don't get paid for it, but that's a title." And I think that was one of my greatest single stories besides the client board member. I'm in Greater Boston Legal Services. We have what we call a client caucus. Like I said, when I got there, I was kind of angry. It was more a little bit of a social club where clients went and they met. Once in a while they would discuss something important. It was a way for clients to get together and then to go to the bigger board. And I felt that was a waste of time. I really did. And so I started talking to other members who were there, who were also feeling like, this is a waste of time. Being on the board, all we say is yes, no, we don't know much about it. And we started getting together. And 4 or 5 of us just started working on it. And I kept, we need to change this. We need to change this. And so I started writing up things, and I started talking, and I started giving, and I said, "What do you think about this? What can we change? What can we do?" Because this is really, just to come here once a month and just talk with each other with no purpose. We all have issues in our communities. How do we make those issues come to light for the program? How do we get the program to listen to us, to make changes in the program? And that's how we started reorganizing, revamping what the Client Caucus was looking like. So getting them and getting myself together, and the 4 of us, because there were 4 of us, we started writing, we started looking, and I would write all their notes down, and then we'd pass it along. And I started talking to the director. And I've always been a strong person. I have a strong personality, and I know that. I have a very aggressive personality, and I know that. And so I would go to the director. "Well, we need this. We need to do this." And he'd look at me and say, "Well, we can't." And I said, "Why not?" "Well, we've never done that." "Well, why not?" And so it was like every question, every answer was, "Well, why not?" And so at the end, I remember going to a meeting, and they had assigned me to the legislative. And I walked in, and nobody said hi to me, and nobody said anything. And, after 20 minutes in the meeting, I said, "Excuse me, but my name is Naidi Cepeda. I've been assigned to this committee. And it seems like I'm a fly on the wall, because nobody has said hi to me. Everybody's talking with each other. You're all using all these initials and side words and lawyer words that I don't know and I don't understand. Nobody has taken the time to, 1, recognize me that I'm here, and 2, of explaining." And I said, "So you know what? Apparently I'm not necessary here. So you keep going on with your little club, and I'm leaving." And I just walked out of the meeting. I went to the director and I said, "If this is the kind of meetings that you want us as clients to participate in, then it's a total waste of time, and I'm not up there for that." And so I told that experience to the other board members, and they said, "Well, that's usually what happens." And I said, "Not to me." And so we said, we need to change the atmosphere. And we started working at that. We revamped the whole Client Caucus in the setting, where the Client Caucus we would invite people to come and give us training. We invited the financial officer to come and give us a training on how to read the financial statements. We invited the different units to come and tell us what they did as part of their daily job, as part of their daily work, as part of their representation for clients. What were the requirements for them to accept your case or not accept your case? What were the steps? What was a client of the day? And what was a lawyer of the day? What was this department? What did this letter stand for? What did that initial stand for? And so we slowly began to learn. And after 11 years, I have to say that it's still going strong. We have some up and downs because every year we have new clients come in. And every year it's just about that there's some things we need to redo. But it's been a good go for 10 years. And like I said, last year, not last year, but a couple of years ago, we went as far as that we redid the bylaws. And within the bylaws, I was in the bylaws committee. There were actually 3 of us took on the job of reading the bylaws of the whole program and redoing the bylaws. And I had the caucus incorporated as a standing committee of the board, along with the executive committee and the financial committee. So now there's 3 standing committees that cannot be voted out, cannot be dismantled. And that's the executive committee, the finance committee, and the caucus. And so now we have an assured place, and everybody knows that we're not an invited guest. We're stakeholders, and we own as much as everybody else. I think in some ways lawyers are afraid. They're afraid of what client power can do. And sometimes it's because they're afraid because they don't know how to work with us collaboratively, because in a way I think that lawyers are taught to, you do, they accept. So there isn't a formal training, whereas you ask, they tell you, and then you work together to get a result. And so I think that's the hardest part for them to wrap around. There's a lot of lawyers that get it. There's a lot of lawyers that get it, but there's some that are still in that mode, whereas I do for them. That's another incident that happened when I came to NLADA. I came to my very first meeting, and it was by, God knows how he does his things. And the second year I was on the Greater Boston Legal Services Board, there was a person who was supposed to come to the NLADA conference. And the man passed away about 2 weeks before the conference. And so they called me and they said, would you like to go to the conference? Mr. Mums died, and we've called, and you're the 3rd person on the list. Can you go? And I said, sure. And I came to the conference, and I was just sitting around. I was new. I didn't know anybody. I observed a lot. That was part of my training, observation, and I observed. And when I was walking by a room, and there was a director's training, a director's meeting, and I was listening, and then I said, gee, I wonder what this, I didn't even know it was a director's meeting. I thought it was a training, and I walk in and I sit way in the back of the room, and I hear, well, we've sent out surveys, and they don't fill them out. And when they do fill them out, we only get about 10 surveys out of 100 we send it. And then somebody else said, well, we went and we offered them assistance doing this, and we had this plan, and it was all done, and all they had to do was follow what we had on, and nobody did it. Nobody participated. And so they kept on going about, and I kept saying, who are they talking about? Who are they talking about? Is it a particular community? Who are they talking about? Oh, and we've tried to do this, and we've sent notices, and we've done this, and we went recruiting in the area. And it finally dawned on me that they were talking about us, clients. And I kept getting progressively angrier, with the statements they were making. So at the end they said, well, we're going to take 3 more questions, or 3 more statements. So I lifted my hand, and, and the man said, well, the young lady in the back, and I said, well, I'm not a lawyer. I said, I'm one of those people. And I said, did you, by any chance, the person who, the ones who did the surveys, did you by any chance ask us if we wanted you to do a survey? I said, the person who said that they came with a whole program and a whole list of things that that you all were going to do for us. Did you by any chance bother to ask us if that's what we needed? I mean, you had us in a meeting. Why didn't you ask if that's what we needed? Because what you think we may need may not necessarily be what we need. And I said, and you know what? It's not you do. And thank you so much. Oh, yes, sir, thank you. No, that's not the way it works. Because we live in the community. We know what we need. Ask us, and we'll work better that way. And then treat us as people who are intelligent, who know what we're doing, who know what we want. And I said, and always think it this way. By the grace of God, you're where you're at, and I'm here. Because by the grace of God, the table can always turn. And I said, and that's what you need to remember. Don't tell me what to do. Ask me if that's what I want to do. Don't tell me that you're going to help me. Ask me if I need the help. And then when I speak, listen, and maybe we can work together. And I walked out of the room. I was sitting having lunch with my executive director, and a couple of people went by and said, "Oh, is she from your program?" And they said, "Yeah." And he said, "Boy, you have a handful." And he's like looking, trying to figure out what was going on. And then he goes, "What did you do?" And I said, "I didn't do anything," So finally they said to him, she went to our director's meeting. And I said, "Oh, that's what it was?" And he said, "What did you know?" I said, "Nothing, I just told them all off because they got me angry." And so from then on, it was like, I kept coming. They sent me a couple of more times to NLADA, and then there was an election, and I ran, and I won the elections for the civil policy group. And I came from the civil policy group, and then I went to the clients, and then I went to the board. And here I am on the board.